The Blockade of Germany, 1939 to 1945, also known as the Economic War, involved operations carried out during World War II by the British Empire and by France in order to restrict the supplies of minerals, fuel, metals, food and textiles needed by Nazi Germany, and later by Fascist Italy, in order to sustain their war efforts. The Economic War consisted mainly of a naval blockade, which formed part of the wider Battle of the Atlantic, but also included the bombing of economically important targets and the preclusive buying of war materials from neutral countries in order to prevent their sale to the Axis powers. The first period, from the beginning of European hostilities in September 1939 to the end of the Phoney War, saw both the Allies and the Axis powers intercepting neutral merchant ships to seize deliveries en route to their respective enemies. Naval blockade at this time proved less than effective because the Axis could get crucial materials from the Soviet Union until June 1941, while Berlin used harbors in Spain to import war materials into Germany. The second period began after the rapid Axis occupation of the majority of the European landmass, Scandinavia, Benelux, France and the Balkans, in 1940 to 1941, resulting in Axis control of major centers of industry and agriculture. The third period started in December 1941 after the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service brought the U.S. into the European War. The final period came after the tide of war finally turned against the Axis after heavy military defeats up to and after D-Day in June 1944, which led to gradual Axis withdrawals from the occupied territories in the face of the overwhelming Allied military offensives. Post-war. Following the end of the war in Europe in early May 1945, large parts of Europe lay completely smashed. Acute food, housing and medical shortages continued for some time, and around 10 million refugees housed in temporary encampments or on the roads. In the two emerging superpowers, Russia and America, post-war productivity rose remarkably by 1948, although the reasons were very different. In Russia, great stimulus was given to emerging industries as a result of frenzied war production, helped in part by advanced industrial plants it took from East Germany after the occupation. America, meanwhile, had been under severe depression in 1938, with vast industrial resources lying idle and 20% of the population unemployed. Rearmament, and later war brought these resources to life, which combined with rising investment and an intact infrastructure kept American industry buoyant, although considerable residual unemployment remained. Much the same situation existed in Canada, whose economy was closely tied to America, and who also suffered no fighting within its territory. The war changed the pattern of the international economy, leaving the U.S. in a very strong bargaining position, having managed to free up international trade to its benefit as a consequence of Lend-Lease, and forcing the British to agree to currency convertibility. Britain's economy was badly hit by the abrupt ending of Lend-Lease a few days after the final defeat of Japan in August 1945. During the war, Britain lost many of its lucrative export markets and now confronted an annual balance of payments deficit of £1.2 billion. As in World War I, Britain emerged from the war militarily triumphant but economically poorer. Rationing did not end until 1953. And economist John Maynard Keynes was sent to America to negotiate a low-interest emergency loan of £3.75 billion to tide Britain over. The final repayment of £45.5 million, then about $83 million, was made on December 31, 2006. In the former occupied countries, severe inflation, caused in part by the large amount of money hoarded during the war, particularly by collaborators, caused further spiraling food prices and a persisting black market. A factor aggravating inflation was low productivity, caused in part by a lack of coal. France assumed it would become entitled to large volumes of German coal from the Ruhr's war reparations, but the Americans, who kept France and other countries going with a number of short-term loans and Marshall aid, began to realize, correctly, that Europe needed the powerhouse German economy to restart growth and prevent the spread of communism, and refused to agree to reparations, the very thing which led to German resentment after World War I and the rise of Hitler. In Germany herself, the people were left to start again from almost nothing, partitioned into zones which became East and West Germany for many years by the Allied powers, a time sometimes referred to as Hour Zero. Although they faced a massive task, with whole cities to be rebuilt and industries reorganized to peaceful production, within a few years the West German economy achieved a miraculous turnaround, and by 1950 a Wirtschaftswunder, economic miracle, was being proclaimed. 85. From 1951 onwards, France, West Germany, Italy, and the Benelux nations began moves towards the unification of Western Europe with the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community, ECSC, the forerunner to the modern European Union. The ECSC created a common market to coordinate the supply of critical commodities to get the wheels of European commerce moving again. An explicit aim of the ECSC and its successors was to minimize risk of future intra-European war, due to the trading links and better knowledge of one another. In this, it has so far been 100% successful, with no two countries ever having waged war on one another while they were both members. The German synthetic oil program was so successful and advanced that during the world fuel crisis of the 1970s, caused by conflict and uncertainty in the Middle East, large American industrial concerns such as Dow Chemical, Union Carbide, and Diamond Shamrock began to reconsider the Nazi-era technology to see if it might provide a partial solution to their problems. Some 300,000 documents relating to the history of the program, including plant diagrams, patent descriptions, detailed reports on which catalysts and additives worked best, and monthly reports from the 25 oil from coal plants had fallen into American hands at the end of the war. At the time, crude oil was readily available at $2 per barrel, a fifth of the cost of man-made oil, and there was very little interest in the German documents. They remained in box storage at the National Archives in Washington for the next 30 years until chemical engineers began the arduous task of collating all the information and feeding it into a computer at the federally run Oak Ridge Energy Center. Although the U.S. managed to secure alternative non-Arabian oil supplies, mainly from Venezuela, synthetic oils are widely used today, mainly in specialized areas such as the airline industry and as lubricants.